No one sees it happen. There is no crowd, no witnesses, no monument raised to mark the place, just a mountain. Wind moving across stone, and a man standing at the edge of everything he has carried his entire life. Moses. He has walked deserts, faced kings, split seas, carried a nation that resisted him at every step, and now he stands alone. You are there with him, not as an observer from a distance, but as someone close enough to feel the stillness of the moment. Because this is not just the end of a life, this is the closing of something that shaped history itself. The mountain rises beneath your feet. Mount Nebo. The air is thin, clear, the kind of clarity that makes everything feel sharper, more defined. From here, you can see it, the land, stretching far beyond the horizon, the promise, the destination, everything he has been leading toward for decades. And yet, he will not step into it. You feel that tension immediately, because everything about his life points forward, toward fulfillment, toward arrival, toward completion. But here, at the edge of it all, he stops, not by accident, not by weakness, but by design. You look at him, and there is no confusion in his posture, no resistance, no argument, because he knows this is where his journey ends. You hear nothing for a moment, no wind, no movement, just stillness. And in that stillness, something passes, not visibly, not dramatically, but decisively. The moment of transition, life to death. And then silence again, deeper this time. Because now, something has changed. You look around. The mountain is the same, the sky is the same, the land below is unchanged, but the man who stood here is gone. And that is where the mystery begins, because what happens next is not seen, not recorded in detail, not explained the way we expect. Only one statement remains. Deuteronomy tells us, he was buried, but no one knows where, no marker, no tomb, no place to return to, no site to visit, nothing. And that is not an accident. You feel the weight of that immediately, because in a world where leaders are remembered through monuments, where graves become places of honor, this is different, deliberately different, because Moses is hidden, his body is taken, placed somewhere no human will ever find. And that raises a question that has echoed for generations. Why? You step closer to the edge of the mountain again, looking out over the land. And the answer does not come from what you see, it comes from what is not there. Because this moment was never meant to become a place, never meant to become a site of memory, never meant to anchor people to something physical. You begin to understand something deeper, because if the location were known, people would come, they would build, they would return again and again, and slowly, the focus would shift from what Moses pointed to Moses himself, from the message to the man. And that shift would change everything. You take a step back and suddenly the absence makes sense. Because this is not about hiding something valuable. It is about protecting something more important, the direction of worship, the focus of faith. You look again at the mountain, and now it feels different, not like a place of loss, but like a place of conclusion, a boundary between what was and what will continue without him. Because Moses' role was never to be the destination. It was to lead to it, and now that role is complete, but the mystery does not end there, because something else happens, something that is only revealed much later, in a single, brief, almost hidden reference. Epistle of Jude mentions something extraordinary, a dispute, not between men, but between beings, over the body of Moses, Michael the archangel, and Satan. And suddenly, the moment on the mountain becomes something more, because this is not just about burial. This is about ownership, authority, control over something that could have been used. You feel the shift in understanding, because this is no longer just a quiet ending, it is a contested one. Something about Moses' body matters, enough to be disputed, enough to be protected, enough to be hidden permanently. And that raises the question even deeper. What was at stake? You stand there, on the mountain, looking at a place that holds no visible trace of what happened, and yet carries one of the greatest mysteries in Scripture, because what God did with Moses' body was not just an act of burial. It was an act of decision, a decision that would shape how generations understand leadership, worship, and focus. And as you look out over the land once more, you realize this story is not just about what happened then. It is about what it prevents now and what it still protects, because sometimes what God hides is just as important as what He reveals. The mountain remains empty, no marker, no stone, no trace, and yet something happened here that echoes far beyond this place. You stand where Moses took his final breath, and the silence feels intentional now, not accidental. Because this is not a forgotten burial. It is a concealed one, deliberately hidden. And that forces you to ask a deeper question. What was God preventing? You begin to think about everything Moses represented, not just a man, but a symbol, the one who stood before Pharaoh, the one who carried the law, the one who spoke with God in ways no one else did. His life was not ordinary, so his death could not be ordinary either. Because if his body remained visible, if his burial place became known, it would not stay just a grave. It would become something else, a destination, a site, a focus. You can almost see it forming. People traveling long distances, returning again and again, marking the ground, building something over it. And slowly, without even realizing it, the focus would begin to shift from what Moses delivered to Moses himself, from the message to the messenger. And history has shown how easily that happens. You don't have to imagine it. It repeats itself again and again, where something sacred becomes centered around a place, a relic, a body, and over time, the meaning gets distorted. You feel that clearly now, because what God does here interrupts that pattern completely, by removing the possibility, by making sure there is no place to return to, no object to elevate, no physical anchor to misdirect attention. And that changes everything. You step back from the edge of the mountain, and now the absence feels intentional in a new way, protective, not just of Moses, but of the people who would come after him, because they are not meant to follow his body, they are meant to follow what he pointed to. And that distinction is everything. But then, your mind returns to that other moment, the one revealed later, brief, almost hidden, and yet impossible to ignore. Epistle of Jude mentions it in a single line, a confrontation, a dispute, Michael the archangel standing against Satan, arguing over the body of Moses. And suddenly, this is no longer just about people misunderstanding. This is about something deeper, because if there was a dispute, that means the body mattered, not just symbolically, but strategically. You begin to think about why. What could be done with a body like that? What could it represent? And the answer becomes unsettling, because if that body were revealed, it could become a tool, a way to redirect attention, a way to create confusion, a way to distort truth. Because Satan does not create from nothing. He distorts what already exists. And Moses, more than almost anyone, represents something powerful: authority, law, connection with God. And if that could be twisted, if that could be turned into something else, then the impact would be massive. You feel the weight of that realization, because now the concealment makes even more sense. This is not just about preventing idolatry. It is about preventing manipulation, preventing something sacred from being used in a way it was never meant to be used. You look again at the mountain, and now it feels guarded, not visibly, but intentionally. Because whatever happened here was not left open, it was secured. You begin to understand something deeper. This is one of the few moments in Scripture where we see conflict over something physical, in a spiritual context. And that tells you something important, because it means the physical world still matters, still carries meaning, still has the potential to influence, and that is why this moment is handled so carefully. You walk slowly across the rocky ground, and now every step feels connected to something unseen, because the real action here was never visible. It happened beyond what human eyes could record, and yet its impact continues. You stop again, and you realize something that reframes everything. God did not just take Moses' body away. He removed the possibility of it being misused, misunderstood, misplaced in importance, and in doing so, he protected something far greater, the clarity of what Moses' life actually meant. Because Moses was never the destination. He was always pointing forward, always directing attention beyond himself. And if his body remained, that direction could be lost. You look out over the land again, the same land Moses saw, the same promise, and now you understand the story was never meant to end with him, and that is why even his burial points forward, not backward, because what God did here ensures that no one can stay at the mountain, no one can stop at the grave. Everyone must move forward. And that is why it still matters. You begin to see it now, not just what happened on the mountain, but why it echoes so far beyond it. Because the story of Moses does not end with his death. It continues. In a way, no one standing on that mountain could have imagined. You step away from the place where his body was hidden, and your perspective shifts forward in time. Because something extraordinary happens later. Something that changes how you understand everything you've just seen. You find yourself on another mountain, not in Moab, not near Mount Nebo, but in a different place, a different moment, a different kind of encounter, Mount of Transfiguration. And suddenly, Moses is there, alive, present, not as a memory, not as a symbol, but as a person, standing, speaking, recognizable. You feel the weight of that immediately, because the man whose body was hidden appears again, not in a grave, not in a monument, but in glory, and he is not alone. Elijah stands with him, and before them, Jesus Christ. And in that moment, everything connects, because Moses does not appear as a figure to be worshipped. He appears as a witness, a confirmation, a bridge between what was and what is being revealed. You realize something powerful. The concealment of his body did not erase him. It preserved his role, because now when he appears, there is no confusion, no place, no relic. No physical object drawing attention away, only the purpose he always carried, to point forward. You step back from that scene, and the realization deepens, because what God prevented at Moses' death allowed for something greater later. If his body had become a site, if his grave had become central, this moment would feel different, confusing, distorted, but instead, it is clear. Moses is not the center. He is pointing to it. You return in your mind to the mountain of his death. And now you see it differently, because that moment was not an ending. It was a transition from one role to another, from leading physically to witnessing spiritually, and that changes everything. But your mind returns again to that mysterious conflict. Epistle of Jude, the dispute, Michael the archangel, and Satan arguing over the body. And now, in light of everything else, you begin to understand the stakes more clearly. Because if Satan could have used that body, if he could have turned it into something else, then the entire narrative could shift. From pointing forward to anchoring backward, from movement to fixation, from truth to distortion. And that is what is being prevented, not just in that moment, but for all time. You feel the significance of that now, because this is not just about one man. It is about how people relate to what God does. Do they follow the message? Or do they attach themselves to the messenger? Do they move forward? Or do they stay anchored to something that was never meant to hold them? You begin to see how easily that line can blur, how quickly something meaningful can become something misplaced. And that is why this moment matters so much, because God does something here that seems unusual, but is actually protective. He removes the possibility of confusion. You walk again through the thought of it. No tomb, no relic, no shrine, nothing to elevate beyond its purpose. And because of that, Moses remains exactly what he was meant to be. A servant, a guide, a voice, not an object, not a destination, and that clarity carries forward. You look again at the moment on the mountain of transfiguration, and now it feels even more powerful, because Moses stands there free from any misinterpretation, free from anything that would compete with what is being revealed. And in that moment, he fulfills his role completely, not by leading anymore, but by pointing. You step back from it all, and the story begins to settle into something clear. What God did with Moses' body was not just about that moment. It was about every moment that would come after, because it ensured that the focus would never shift, that the message would remain intact, that the direction would stay forward. And as you stand there, holding both scenes together, the hidden mountains and the revealed one, you realize something that changes everything. Moses was never meant to be found. He was meant to be understood, and understanding him correctly changes how you understand everything else. Now you understand why no one ever found him. Not because the place was lost, not because time erased it, but because it was never meant to be discovered. You stand again in your mind on Mount Nebo, where Moses took his final breath. The wind still moves, the land still stretches out in silence. Nothing marks the ground. And now, that absence feels intentional in a way you cannot ignore. Because if that place existed in a visible way today, everything would change. People would go there, stand there, touch the ground, build around it, and slowly, without meaning to, they would begin to treat it as sacred in itself. Not as a memory, but as a source. And that is where things begin to shift, because human nature leans toward the visible, toward what can be touched, toward what can be located. And when that happens, focus moves from God to place, from purpose to object, from truth to attachment. And that is exactly what was prevented. You feel the weight of that now, because what seems like a mystery is actually protection, not just for Moses, but for everyone who would come after him. You think again about the confrontation described in Epistle of Jude, Michael the archangel standing firm, Satan opposing, not fighting with noise, not with spectacle, but with authority. And that tells you something profound, because it means this moment was not small. It mattered enough to be contested, and anything contested at that level carries significance far beyond what is visible. You begin to see the pattern clearly now. God hides what could be misused, protects what could be distorted, removes what could become a distraction, not because it lacks value, but because it has too much. And that is what Moses' body represented. Too much meaning, too much potential for misunderstanding, too much risk of becoming something it was never meant to be. So it was removed, not erased, not forgotten, but placed beyond reach. And because of that, the message remains clear. You think about how rare that is, because so often history becomes anchored to objects. Places become more important than purpose. Symbols become more important than meaning. But here, that pattern is interrupted completely. You take one last look at the invisible place, and you realize something that changes how you see everything. The most important part of Moses' story is not where he ended. It is what he pointed toward, and that direction could not be allowed to change. You remember the moment on the Mountain of Transfiguration, Mount of Transfiguration, where Moses appears again, not as a relic, not as a memory tied to a place, but as a living witness, standing beside Jesus Christ. And in that moment, everything is clear. Moses is not the focus. He is pointing to it, and that is the key, because his entire life was about leading people forward, never stopping, never becoming the destination. And even in death, that purpose continues. Because there is no grave to return to, no place to stop, no physical anchor to hold people back, only forward movement. You begin to feel how relevant that still is, because the same pattern exists today. The temptation to hold on to what can be seen, to build around what can be touched, to focus on what feels tangible instead of what is true. And this story interrupts that. It forces a different response, to let go of the need for physical certainty and trust what cannot be located. You step back one final time. The mountain fades, the moment settles, and what remains is understanding. Because what God did with Moses' body was not just about hiding something, it was about revealing something. That truth is not tied to a place, that purpose is not anchored to a person, and that what matters most cannot always be found with human eyes, and that is why it still matters. Because even now, the lesson remains. If you could find Moses' grave, you might stop there. But because you can't, you have to keep moving forward, and that was always the point.